My name is Lila Hart. I worked in technology sales long enough to recognize when a meeting smelled like quiet sabotage. It began one early morning when human resources invited me to a role alignment discussion. That phrase always carried danger. I walked into a glass conference room where two HR managers waited with the calm smiles people use before delivering bad news. A folder sat in front of my chair. Inside it rested a document titled Revised Job Responsibilities. I read slowly. My role had shifted from Senior Client Retention Director to something vague called Strategic Market Transition Advisor. The language sounded impressive, but the substance was hollow. My commission structure had changed. My authority over long-standing client accounts had been diluted. Escalations would now route through a centralized service desk. The service desk, I knew, rarely answered the phone. I looked up at the HR manager, a polite man named Owen. "This appears to remove most of my operational authority," I said. He folded his hands. "It aligns responsibilities across divisions." Translation. Someone upstairs wanted me marginalized. I asked for written confirmation that the document replaced my existing employment agreement. Owen hesitated, then nodded. That hesitation told me everything. I had spent years building the client base for a cybersecurity platform owned by a company called Stratus Harbor Systems. My work involved endless client calls, midnight network outages, weekend crisis calls. I handled everything personally because executives loved saying that I protected the company's most valuable accounts. Now they wanted my accounts without me. Corporate strategy often assumes women will either panic or resign. I did neither. I read the document again, carefully. The new description said my role involved strategic guidance only. Operational escalation responsibility moved to the corporate service line. Interesting. Very interesting. For years, clients called my personal number at all hours because the company never staffed its support desk properly. I answered because protecting relationships meant protecting revenue. The new document quietly relieved me of that obligation. Which meant something important. I no longer needed to rescue the company from its own negligence. That realization settled into my mind like a chess piece sliding into position. I signed acknowledgement of the document but wrote a small note beneath my signature. Accepted as written. Effective immediately. Owen looked pleased. I felt amused. During the next week I implemented the new structure with precise obedience. At night my phone stayed silent. Around the early hours when outages normally triggered frantic client calls, I slept peacefully. When messages appeared the next morning, I replied with professional warmth. Thank you for reaching out. Per updated support policy, please contact the main corporate support number listed in your service agreement. I included the official number. Clients called it. The line rang endlessly. Some tried again later. Others sent frustrated emails. Each time I answered politely with the same instruction. Corporate support. Corporate escalation. Corporate process. The exact system my executives insisted would scale more efficiently. Within 2 weeks something remarkable happened. My clients began calling me again, not about technical failures but about something else. They sounded tired. Frustrated. Concerned. One of them, a data center director named Samir, said something during a morning call that made me pause. Lila, nobody inside your company seems to know our infrastructure anymore. You are the only person who ever understood our architecture. I thanked him. Then he said something even more interesting. Have you ever considered building your own firm? I did not answer immediately. But I smiled. Because corporate leaders often forget a simple truth. Client loyalty rarely belongs to a company. It belongs to the person who actually solves the problem. And they had just handed me a document proving I no longer needed to save them. The game had officially begun. The strange thing about corporate exile is that it often creates freedom. My calendar grew quieter. The new job description meant fewer emergency calls, fewer late-night rescues, fewer frantic messages from executives demanding miracles. Officially, I now offered strategic guidance, which meant attending meetings where people discussed problems they did not understand. Unofficially, it meant I had time to observe. Observation is powerful when a company underestimates you. During the next several weeks, I noticed patterns that executives seemed determined to ignore. Client complaints increased. Support tickets remained unresolved. Several companies renewed contracts reluctantly because they trusted me personally. Yet every renewal meeting contained a new question. Why can we never reach support? I answered honestly. Support requests must go through the corporate service line. They called. No one answered. Eventually, clients stopped pretending the system worked. Instead, they contacted me directly and asked what they should do. I repeated the same response every time. Per policy, I must direct all operational issues through the corporate number. It sounded obedient. It was also devastating. Corporate leadership had designed a system that only functioned because I personally solved every crisis before executives noticed it. Once I followed the official process, the illusion collapsed. Within a month, several major clients began scheduling private calls with me. Not about outages. About strategy. One early morning, I spoke with a logistics company that operated dozens of distribution centers. Their security director, a calm woman named Dana, asked a blunt question. If we left Stratus Harbor Systems tomorrow, what vendor would you trust? I leaned back in my chair. Technically, I could not recommend competitors. However, I could discuss industry standards. So I did. We spent nearly an hour discussing infrastructure resilience, contract language, and service level guarantees. Dana took notes carefully. At the end, she said something that changed everything. You should build a consulting firm. Clients would follow you. I laughed politely. Inside my mind, the thought grew roots. During the next few weeks, similar conversations happened again and again. Healthcare networks. Financial firms. Cloud storage companies. All of them shared the same complaint. They trusted my judgment. They no longer trusted my employer. Meanwhile, HR continued their quiet effort to sideline me. They removed my authority over several accounts. They reassigned projects to younger employees who lacked client relationships. One afternoon, a manager informed me that the executive team wanted to evaluate my long-term cultural alignment. Corporate language for pushing someone toward resignation. I did not resign. Instead, I scheduled a meeting with a lawyer who specialized in employment contracts and corporate governance. The consultation was illuminating. My employment agreement contained a non-solicitation clause. However, it applied only if I actively recruited clients while still employed. If clients independently approached me after departure, the situation became very different. The lawyer explained something else as well. Companies often assume non-compete language will intimidate employees into silence. In reality, many clauses fail under legal scrutiny, particularly when employers substantially alter job responsibilities. I smiled slowly. HR had already provided written proof that my role had changed. Which meant they had weakened their own contract. The irony felt delicious. Back at the office, my coworkers continued pretending nothing unusual was happening. Executives praised the new support model during leadership meetings while ignoring the rising wave of client frustration. I simply followed policy. When the phone rang late at night, I did not answer. When clients emailed urgently, I directed them to corporate support. And every morning, new messages appeared asking the same question. Lila, have you ever thought about starting your own company? Eventually, I stopped laughing when they asked. Because the idea was no longer hypothetical. It was becoming inevitable. A curious transformation happens when clients begin viewing you as the real authority instead of the company that pays your salary. The tone of conversations changes. Instead of reporting problems, they begin asking for guidance. One morning during a video call with a regional banking network, their operations director leaned forward and said something that sounded almost conspiratorial. If you ever leave Stratus Harbor Systems, please call me before you announce anything publicly. I nodded calmly. Inside, I was building a plan. Starting a company requires more than courage. It requires structure, legal protection, financial clarity. Too many professionals rush into entrepreneurship without understanding the framework that keeps them safe. I refused to make that mistake. During evenings, I researched corporate formation strategies, liability shields, and equity structures. My lawyer introduced me to an accountant who specialized in technology consulting firms. Together, we mapped out the foundations of a future company. A limited liability structure to protect personal assets. Service agreements that clearly defined response expectations. Retainer models that guaranteed availability without midnight chaos. I designed something very different from my employer. Stratus Harbor Systems sold software licenses and treated support like an inconvenience. My firm would sell expertise. Clients did not actually need software vendors. They needed someone who understood their systems and could negotiate with multiple vendors without bias. The model felt obvious once I wrote it down. Meanwhile, corporate life continued its slow theater of denial. HR scheduled another meeting one late afternoon. This time, they introduced a performance review that criticized my reduced operational engagement. I listened quietly. You appear less responsive to client emergencies, the HR representative said. I opened the folder containing my revised job description. This document states operational escalation now routes through corporate support. The room fell silent. Technically, I was performing exactly as instructed. They could not punish obedience. After the meeting, I walked back to my desk feeling strangely calm. When organizations begin contradicting themselves, the outcome usually becomes predictable. Over the next few weeks, something even more interesting occurred. Clients began bypassing corporate entirely. Instead of reporting outages, they contacted me privately and asked how they should structure new infrastructure contracts with other vendors. They trusted my judgment more than the sales teams assigned to replace me. One evening around the quiet hours when office is empty, I received a call from Samir again. His voice sounded thoughtful. "Our executive board discussed your situation," he said. "That sounds serious," I replied. "It is. We plan to terminate our renewal with Stratus Harbor Systems next quarter. If you launch a consulting firm, we would like to become your anchor client." Anchor clients are rare. They provide stable revenue during the uncertain early months of a new business. I thanked him carefully. After we ended the call, I sat in my office staring at the city lights outside the window. For years I believed my career depended on the approval of corporate executives. Now the opposite was becoming clear. Executives depended on the relationships I built. And they had decided to discard me anyway. That miscalculation would soon become very expensive. I finalized paperwork for a new company called Silver Bridge Advisory. The name reflected something simple. Bridges connect systems that cannot communicate alone. That was exactly what clients needed. I did not resign immediately. Instead, I waited patiently. Because sometimes the most satisfying move in business involves letting your opponent complete their mistake. The official push came during another meeting with human resources. This one felt rehearsed. 3 managers sat across from me with sympathetic expressions that reminded me of doctors delivering unfortunate diagnoses. The senior representative cleared her throat. "Lila, leadership believes your role no longer aligns with the direction of the technology sales division." Corporate phrasing again. I listened politely. They offered a severance package that looked generous at first glance. However, severance always contains invisible traps. I asked for the written agreement. Then I read every line. Several clauses attempted to restrict my ability to work with clients I had supported for years. Others required broad confidentiality commitments that extended beyond reasonable boundaries. I closed the folder. "I will review this with legal counsel," I said. The HR manager nodded stiffly. They assumed negotiation would weaken my position. They did not realize I had already prepared. My lawyer responded within 2 days with a revised agreement. It removed excessive restrictions and clarified something very important. Clients who independently contacted me after my departure would not violate any clause. HR resisted briefly. Then they accepted. Companies often surrender when they realize documentation favors the employee. My final week at Stratus Harbor Systems felt strangely peaceful. Colleagues avoided eye contact because corporate rumors traveled quickly. Some suspected I planned something. Others simply assumed I would disappear quietly. They underestimated the power of reputation. On my final afternoon, I sent a brief farewell message to clients. The note thanked them for years of collaboration and included my personal email address for future correspondence unrelated to Stratus Harbor Systems. Nothing in the message solicited business. It simply preserved communication. The response was immediate. Messages arrived throughout the evening. "Please inform us when your next venture launches. Where will you be consulting next? Can we schedule a conversation about infrastructure strategy?" I smiled while reading them. Within days, Silver Bridge Advisory opened its doors. The first contract arrived from Samir's company exactly as promised. The agreement focused on infrastructure consulting and vendor negotiation. Instead of selling software, I evaluated systems objectively and helped companies structure stronger contracts with multiple providers. The work felt refreshing. No midnight support chaos. No corporate politics. Just strategy. Word spread quickly among former clients. Several organizations requested advisory retainers that guaranteed periodic consultations without emergency obligations. Revenue grew faster than expected. Meanwhile, something curious happened to Stratus Harbor Systems. Clients began leaving. Without someone quietly managing relationships, small problems escalated into contract disputes. Support lines remained understaffed. Executives blamed market conditions instead of their own decisions. I observed the situation with professional detachment. Revenge rarely requires aggression. Sometimes it simply requires stepping aside and allowing consequences to arrive. 6 months after launching Silver Bridge Advisory, my calendar looked very different from my old corporate schedule. Instead of reacting to crises, I guided companies through careful decisions about infrastructure, vendor contracts, and data security strategy. My role involved listening, analyzing, and negotiating from a position of independence. Clients appreciated that independence more than I expected. One morning, I received an email from Dana, the security director who once asked if I would ever build a firm. Her company had recently terminated their contract with Stratus Harbor Systems after months of unresolved outages. Now they wanted advisory support. We scheduled a call during the early hours when executives usually discuss serious matters. Dana spoke with calm satisfaction. "Our leadership prefers neutral advisors. Vendors tend to protect their own products rather than our interests. That statement summarized the entire problem with my former employer. Companies that sell technology often forget the client perspective. Independent advisors do not. By the end of that week, her company signed a consulting agreement with Silver Bridge Advisory. Then another organization followed. And another. Something else happened as well. Several former employees from Stratus Harbor Systems contacted me privately. They described increasing instability inside the company. Revenue declined. Executives reorganized departments repeatedly while searching for explanations. I listened without comment. Professional restraint often speaks louder than celebration. Around that time, I attended an industry conference where technology leaders discussed the future of cybersecurity infrastructure. During a networking reception, I noticed a familiar face across the room. One of the executives from Stratus Harbor Systems. He approached cautiously. "I hear you launched a consulting firm," he said. "That is correct. Several of our former clients now mention your name during negotiations." I nodded politely. He studied me for a moment. "You built those relationships?" "Yes." Silence lingered between us. Eventually he sighed. "We underestimated your influence." That admission carried quiet satisfaction. However, I did not gloat. Corporate decisions always carry consequences. The company chose to replace expertise with bureaucracy. Clients responded logically. They followed the person who understood their systems. Later that evening, while walking back to my hotel, I reflected on the strange path that brought me here. HR believed they were pushing me out of relevance. Instead, they gave me the freedom to stop rescuing a broken system. Once I followed the official rules, clients saw the truth for themselves. Businesses often think loyalty belongs to the brand. Reality works differently. Trust belongs to the individual who solves the problem. Silver Bridge Advisory continued growing steadily, built on clarity, contracts, and relationships that respected mutual value. Sometimes success arrives quietly, not through confrontation but through patience and preparation. In my case, it arrived because a company tried to push me aside. They simply forgot that removing the bridge does not stop traffic. It only forces everyone to find a better path.